Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and I'm taking care of business. Joining me today is Dan Kelly, President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thanks for joining us today, Dan.
Good to be with you, Mario.
Let's talk credit cards. So there was a recent multi-million-dollar class action settlement with Mastercard and VISA. First of all, explain for us, what that settlement was and why, and what it means to the business community.
Yeah, well, look, if I take you back a few years, in 2007, 2008, Visa and MasterCard started introducing all these premium cards to the market, cards like Visa Infinite, MasterCard World and World Elite. Small businesses who accept those credit cards obviously already paid a merchant fee somewhere in the range of 1.5% to 2.5% of the transaction for the courtesy of accepting those cards. But then the rate started to go even higher when these premium cards were issued. There were some behaviors that many merchants thought were not what we needed to engender competition in the marketplace. So a few of them, wasn't CFIB that did this, but a few merchants on their own launched a class action lawsuit against Visa and MasterCard for some anti-competitive behaviors. That was then settled out of court. The class. And as a result, there were two big changes. One, that there would be several millions of dollars refunded to small and medium-sized businesses. And now all businesses can get a piece of that. And second, merchants will have the ability to add a surcharge for accepting credit cards up in October of this year. So there's one change that you get some money back, and you get it back almost right away. You can apply. The portal is open. And secondly, in the fall, businesses will be able to add a surcharge, which they're not permitted to do at this very moment.
So what does it mean in cold, hard cash for the average business in Canada?
It's not a ton of money, but certainly at this time, with costs going through the roof on every line of the budget of a small business's budget, as you and I have discussed many times, any relief, any refund or rebate is welcome news. Businesses that accepted Visa and MasterCard as far back as 2001 can get about $30 a year for each year that they've accepted those cards, to a maximum of $600. But $600 is nothing to sneeze at. It's a fairly simple website that you can go in, add your name, your business. There's not a ton of documentation that is required, so you basically have to just attest that your business was around and accepting cards back to a certain date. And then you can get up to $600. That money, I think, will be delivered in the fall of this year, but the website is now open and links are available on CFIB's website, cfib.ca. We're trying to encourage as many of our members and small business owners generally to apply. And if they have any problems, obviously my association is there to help.
Yeah. So the issue of credit card processing fees has been something you guys have been dealing with and lobbying governments, to make some changes there. Can you talk a little bit about that, Dan, and why that's important?
Yeah, look, as we spoke about just a second ago, I mean, the cost pressures on business right now are enormous, but very few people understand how significant the costs are just to accept payment. And during the pandemic, these costs actually went up. Not because the rates went up, but because more and more consumers were opting to pay electronically. They pulled out their credit cards far more often for the in-store transactions. But of course, online transactions were way, way more plentiful during the pandemic, especially during lockdowns and capacity restrictions. And for those kinds of transactions, the fees are even higher. So the share of transactions that was either on a credit card or done online with higher fees was much greater during the pandemic, putting pressure on small firms. The government has, to its credit, both the Tories and the Liberals over the last decade or so, have lowered credit card processing fees in negotiation with Visa and MasterCard. So rates went down to an average of 1.5% for interchange. Then they dropped down when the Liberals took office to 1.4%. And the Liberals have promised a further third reduction in credit card processing fees to be negotiated with Visa and MasterCard. Unfortunately, they promised that back in 2019, again in 2021, And here we are, 2022, there's no sign of the government moving on that promise, and we're lobbying actively for them to make that happen.
Okay, you talked about surcharges. How do you think consumers will react to that?
Well, look, it is the consumer reaction that is the reason why surcharging is so important. Most merchants will have nothing to do with surcharges. Surcharges have been allowed in Europe and now in the US for some time. Very, very few businesses use them. They do in the tourism industry, for example, to try to, if you're paying a $3,000 hotel bill, or they often will add a small surcharge for that. I think airlines do as well. Merchants, though, have not had this power in Canada yet, other than a few very, very specific circumstances like utilities.
Yeah.
But this power, we think, is going to be helpful for merchants to have in case Visa and Mastercard try to increase rates once again. If they do, merchants, you can imagine, might say, you know what, if you're adding another half point to my credit card transactions, we're just going to start to pass that on directly as opposed to indirectly to consumers. And consumers would hate it. We believe that if merchants started to do this, the Visa, MasterCard, and the banks would hear about it from their clients and then back down on any fee increase. So we do think that it is a way for some merchants to manage their costs, to try to encourage more low-cost forms of payment like Interac, or it becomes a power that merchants can use in those awful circumstances if we face a rate increase. So we do think that the power is important. I don't believe that it will be used by a large number of merchants. Most merchants, of course, it takes a lot to get your customer in your door. It takes even more to get them to your website or to the sales counter. You're not going to want to frustrate them at that final point of sale and risk losing the sale altogether. And so merchants, generally speaking, are on the side of consumers. This power would be helpful, though, to push back.
Okay, super. One last thing, Dan, not related to credit cards, but just overall, what's your sense of how small business owners are feeling these days as we kind of merge out of the pandemic?
Well, look, most of the restrictions are now behind us, right? Almost every province has ended virtually all of the COVID restrictions that were in place. So businesses are essentially free to open in whatever manner they would like, with the exception of travel. Right now, of course, there is still a vaccine mandate for people to get on an airplane, either Canadians to travel by air, cruise, or rail. And of course, there is a restriction for international guests in coming to Canada. They have to be fully vaccinated as well. That we believe does need to change. We're putting pressure on the feds to make that happen. But despite the fact that most COVID restrictions at the provincial level are gone, only 40% of small businesses are back to normal levels of sales. So for many of them, especially in arts and entertainment and the hospitality sector, yes, they're getting some of their customers trickling back, but it's not at the level that is sustainable for their business. And that's the big worry here. How much longer can they outrun their debt? That's why most businesses right now are very freaked out about labor shortages, supply chain challenges, and cost increases. The credit cards can be at least one cost that we see go down. That's why we are really pushing businesses to apply for that rebate that they're eligible for, and to put pressure on Ottawa to deliver on a further rate reduction for small firms across the country.
All right, super. Thanks, Dan, for joining us today.
Anytime, Mario.
All right, that was Dan Kelly, President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, taking care of business. Thanks for joining us today.